Hey, Butchie, you got me now. Oh boy. So, pretty good line, so I'm kind of obsessed with it here. Alright, so we were talking about Hess. And as you see, Hess is living in Germany around the time of Karl Marx. And he originally is somewhat in the mindset of a Karl Marx socialist sort of revolutionary person, and then somehow he gets a change of heart. I don't know. We left off about page 127 or so in my thing. Just pick up a few quotes before we move on to somebody else. I think you can read this yourself. Look, for instance, mission of Israel. But mark you, the restoration of the Jewish state will not deprive the world of even a single one of all these benefits, real or imagined, which the Jews and the dispersion, I'll put the word supposedly, confer on it. So, it seems to me that the benefits that the Jews in exile supposedly confer, theirs are supposedly have been exaggerated. Yeah, I would agree with him about 10,000%. That they don't confer all this stuff that the Reformed Jews think that they're going to be talking about. And he speaks at the end of that section about being politically organized, which is very important. And page 128, the Jew who does not believe in the national regeneration of his people has only one task: to labor like the enlightened Christian for the dissolution of his religion. Anyway, I believe the national character, next section of Judaism, does not exclude universalism, etc., etc., etc. Let's see, for instance, on page 130, talking about being part of humanity. Nor can there be any objection to the universalist tendencies insofar as they endeavor to establish close relation among nations, but unfortunately this universalism has gone too far, both in life and science. So in his period, already the 1850s or 60s, he thinks that this universal brotherhood, etc., of mankind has extinguished the individual differences. He'd be surprised to find out what happened in the 20th century, I'm sure. It is against these encroachments of the most sacred principles of creative life, talking about Hegelianism, if you like, and the zeitgeist to be creative in the time, that the national tendencies of our time are reacting, because it's a time of nationalist reactions, and of course that goes on into our century. 133, towards the Jewish restoration. Just picking out some interesting little passages. We can't do them all here. But what we have to do at present for the regeneration of the nation, Jewish nation, first is to keep alive the hope of political rebirth in our people. When political conditions in the Orient, meaning the East, shape themselves so as to permit the organization of a beginning of the restoration of a Jewish state, this beginning will express itself in the founding of Jewish colonies, etc. Well, he's got it exactly right. Now, when is this, not a right in terms of the right idea, a right in terms of what actually happened? And this is 1862. So he's 40 years ahead of Herzl. And he's already saying, at the time of our Civil War, that when the political conditions in the East, well, when did the political conditions begin to move in that direction? With the slow dissolution of the Ottoman Empire, which was falling apart as the 19th century progressed, and when the Ottoman Empire entered the First World War, of course, it lost all of these areas to Britain and France. I explained that to you last time. And then, of course, the increase in transportation, steamboats, rail, increasing communications, all those things led to the possibility of establishing a movement among a widely scattered people, whereas previously you wouldn't be able to do that. And he said first it would be small colonies, and he said France would probably lend a hand at that time, he thought. Well, we see that agricultural school, which is founded in the 1860s as well, as we saw in the Calendar material, is done by the group called the Alliance Française, which is not French government, but a Jewish group in France, you know, contributing to this financially. So the Alliance Française is like the, in America, you hear about the UJA, the United Jewish Appeal. They helped, they helped fund this agricultural station. And I told you, didn't make it clear last time, Herzl went around to all of the leading political figures from 1896 to 1900 or so, once he got, called his Congress and got things moving. And he was received by everyone. Kaiser of Germany. And Kaiser was visiting Palestine, as I told you. And there we got diverted into all the German inroads into the east. And the Kaiser then, when he rode to Jerusalem from Jaffa, the coast, which is how you went, something like the Knights, Crusaders, if you saw that, did you see that movie recently that was done about the Crusading Knights and the Holy Land? They would always go from Jaffa up to Jerusalem. Anyway, he stood at, this was a place, you can see it today, it's on the road outside of Tel Aviv on the way to Jerusalem, this agricultural training station. And this is in 1900 or so. So that's where he chose to stand to greet the Kaiser as he went by and bow to him. I don't know, they didn't shake hands, obviously, but. So he talks about some article he's worried about here called the Near Eastern Question, which is, this is 150 years ago. It's pretty hard for us to imagine people were talking about these things then. 134. What European power would today oppose the plan that Jews united through a Congress, that's again what Herzl's idea is, have a Congress, should buy back their ancient homeland? Who would object to it, he says. Well, as it turned out, lots of people objected to it. Even today they object to it. So, and you think that they stole the land. They didn't steal the land. They bought the land from people who were not using it. And if you can, you say, well, weren't people using it? No, it was malaria-infested swamps and things. And they purchased it through this Tzedakah process that you're familiar with. I don't know if you've ever been to any Jewish homes, but in the old days there was a little blue box which was labeled Tzedakah, which you put money in for contributions, like the temple tax used to be. And out of things like that, they would then collect all those monies, and there would be, you know, this UJA and different organizations like that would send a certain amount of money to old folks' homes, a certain amount of money to social welfare things, a certain amount of money to this Zionist Congress, if you like, to help purchase them. You will come to the land of your fathers, decorated with the crown of age-long martyrdom, and finally you will completely heal. How this socialist guy became like this is hard to imagine. From all your ills, your capital will again bring the wide stretches of barren land under cultivation. Perfect visionary, he sees it all. Your labor and industry will once more turn the ancient soils of fruitful valleys. Now compare this with the Reformed Jewish program, which is developing at the same time as this. Which would be more attractive to a young Jewish person? How would they be able to relate to the Reformed Jewish program? You know, changing choir, changing the service to have choirs. All right, the service is antiquated, but just copying Christian services, having you know, a rabbi in a black robe like ministers, and having a singer there, and having choirs and pews, and deleting all embarrassing things from the prayer book. Oh, how can a young person relate to that? Would be impossible. Yet this is a program that many people could relate to. even today, actually, if you're infused with that kind of passion and spirit. So it's quite amazing that he could write this at that time. Next section, the bottom of 134, what he calls comments on Jewish creativity. It's only after the extinction of the national life of the people, which mold the religious norms as greatly as it was molded by them, that these norms have assumed a rigid form. What's he talking about? When was the national life of the people extinguished? Now, we've had all this in this class. 60s? Well, started at that time, but it went on to the 132, 136. That's when the actual extinction really became almost final. The second Jewish revolt, which we don't have documented, as well as the first Jewish revolt from 66 to 73 in the fall of Masada, but the national life hadn't yet been extinguished. It was really following the second Jewish revolt that the nation was totally extinguished. And so on. So, anyway, it's that period. So that's what he's talking about. So what happened after that? When did this rigid form that he's complaining about, what we now call Orthodox Judaism, develop? In the rabbinic materials following that. That's what he's complaining about, the Talmud. That's what he's complaining about. Not the poetry of the Old Testament. He's complaining about the Talmud. That's what, he won't call it that, but that's what he considers. I mean, Mendelssohn's making excuses for it, and this is why the religious Jews, to some extent, were anti-Zionist, because they felt that they should wait. Now, today, religious Jews are very Zionist. Yeah, after 6 million of them were basically immolated. They learned a horrific lesson, you know, that they couldn't just sit back and pray. I know it's a harsh thing to say, but that made Zionists of all of them that were left, just about. And even still today, there are Hasidim who are anti-Zionists, who want an Arab government in Palestine because they object to secular forms of expression. There's a big fight in Jerusalem going on today on the gay pride parade that was supposed to take place in Jerusalem, but there would have been so much riots from religious people that they put it over into a stadium instead of down the main streets. I don't have an opinion about that. I think you can go too far with modern forms in a country that's just developing. I think you can have a gay pride in LA and in New York and places like that, but to start, you know, introducing a whole other issue into the Jerusalem matter when it's already complicated enough, I think that's probably pushing things beyond what people can deal with at the moment. So, Tel Aviv, they have that kind of thing, which is a fairly secular city down on the coast, but in Jerusalem it's probably a bit much for people to be able to handle. So I'm not surprised that they finally pushed it out to a football stadium to try to sort of, you know, kindly set it a little bit away from causing riots. When the free current of national historical development, that almost sounds like fascism, you see, national historical development. And there is a streak of national socialism that does start to run through a lot of these national movements in Europe, not just here. Look, Hungary, Mussolini, famous poet in Italy who was known for that kind of tendency. He was the national poet of Italy. I can't remember his name now, but he was a very, very famous Italian poet. It'll come to me what his name is. And a lot of these countries. So this is, and Menachem Begin later on in Israel life was accused of people of being this kind of person. His nationalist Herut party that developed in the 40s under British occupation. And his predecessor, who we'll read in this class, hopefully we get there, Zev Jabotinsky, they accused him of a kind of Jewish, not Nazism or fascism, but extreme nationalism. extreme nationalism. And the labor people were against it. This is right-wing nationalism. The labor people were, labor Zionism was for, you know, just secular, work the land, according to socialist principles Zionism. And we'll get to all of those things presently, but there's a streak of this in Hess here, as you can see, because of the Hegel idea. Hegel does infuse these things in Germany with this kind of aspect. You know, you can push this way too far, as we saw in Germany in the 20s and 30s of the last century. You see this spirit which will create new things. No one can foretell the form and shape. The spirit of the regenerated nations will assume, well, in Germany it assumed something horrific. As regards their religious expression, especially with respect to the Jewish religion, they will certainly be equally different both from present day and from ancient religion. You know, personally, my own feeling, I wish something like that would happen in Judaism in terms of getting a form of expression that is different from what people are used to. I mean, people are tired of these old forms, and he's right. I think we need new forms, but we don't want to get into a national socialist situation, Nazism or whatever. Something creative, like I often say to my Hasidic friends, why are you walking around in black costumes still? What is it you're mourning? I mean, black guys, or black is beautiful, black is not beautiful, but we associate black with mourning. Can you guys ever stop thinking the time of mourning may be over? That it's time to think of new forms. They're not able, they're so rigid. I mean, just a little thing like that would like, what are you talking about? They wouldn't know what you were talking about. I always consider, hey, why don't you guys wear white? At least go around in white, you know? And it's just beyond their comprehension. That's the point. They're frozen solid, totally frozen in these forms. And that's what he's talking about. He's very creative-minded, and to my mind, that's what's necessary. If you want children, young people, to be turned on or passionate or interested or involved in something, how can you involve young people in some of these forms, you know, except through coercion or brainwashing? It's almost impossible. It's impossible. You need something, young people want to express themselves colorfully. Decidedly, they want something new, something within the tradition, but something new. And frankly, I don't see, he thinks it's coming, but I don't see it having happened.
Aren't those black suits fairly recent?
No, they've been wearing those things since the 1600s and maybe before, and you know, it's all from mourning for the temple. It's mourners for Zion, mourners for the temple, that's all it's from, I think. I mean, I don't have the whole history, but you can look into it further. Where did they get this kind of, why are they wearing black all the time? Yeah, because they're mourning something. What?
I think it's 18th century from the Baal Shem Tov.
Yeah, but that doesn't mean it didn't exist before that. He's picking up on something. Doesn't mean that Hasidic Judaism. We're talking about mourners for Zion before that. Baal Shem Tov is, that's just one episode as things move along. But I'm sure they're adopting previous forms.
That hat they wear.
Huh?
That hat they wear.
Well, anyway, I don't want to get into you know, we don't have time for everything, and I'm not going to get into it. We have a colleague in the department who can tell you lots of things about those kinds of things. We'll let him deal with that. We'll stick to these other people, but I just threw that out as something to think about. Why doesn't anyone ever think among these people, which is such an obvious thing, hey, what are you wearing black for? You know, tradition, okay, tradition, but you know, that's what Hegel is saying here. He said that no one can foretell what form and shape the new reborn life and spirit of regeneration will assume. As regards to religious expression, especially with regard to the Jewish religion, they will certainly be equally different from present day and from ancient religion. Well, I don't think it has happened. That's all I'm saying. He is hopeful that that's happening, but I don't see any creativity in that regard at all. We're totally frozen in the 19th century arguments here still in Judaism. There's no creativity whatsoever that I am able to report. But I may be wrong. I may be wrong. You judge for yourself. And I think that's why Jewish young people are, not that they're astray, I don't say that they're astray, but they don't find things that can move them, to my mind. Now, there was a thing going on in Israel recently. I forget what it was called. It was called the Hilltop Movement, where young people were expressing themselves differently. They weren't wearing black anymore. They were very religious, but they were establishing outposts on the hilltops and so on and so forth. Were willing to die if it came to that. And it was all sort of very creative, very, no one was living on these hilltops. I mean, no one could have any objection except politically from Mecca or Riyadh or, you know, the Carlyle Foundation or something like that, the White House or London or Paris or something like that. These were young people that were being very, very creative, and they've been squelched by the Israel government now because of the pressure from overseas on the Israel government. But I saw those young people, and they were very, very passionate, committed, colorful, excited, and so on. And they were establishing all these new hilltop things with caravans, and riding around by themselves on the West Bank, and weren't afraid of terrorists or anything like that. But the present government wants to, you know, repress all those things for, you know, whatever negotiations, things it's carrying out with other governments overseas. But this is where young people, you know, this is, I'm just trying to explain what Hess is talking about. That's the only thing I've seen that was an expression of creative, new expression of creative spirit that Hess is talking about. The main problem, 3, change of spirit with the Jewish national movement is not of religious nature, but centers around one point: how to awaken the patriotic sentiment, there we go, in the hearts of our progressive Jews. Now that's also very prescient. This is 1862. What's a progressive Jew? Conservative, Reform Judaism. How do you make them patriotic? Well, only Hitler finally did that. Unfortunately. I mean, you know, who led the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising? I mean, it was all Zionists who were in the war. All the others went almost meekly to their deaths as he was rounding up people in the Warsaw Ghetto. You know, they put everyone in the Warsaw Ghetto by the hundreds of thousands from all over Poland with no food or anything like that, and they were basically, you know, clawing at each other just to survive. And then these extreme Zionist groups refused to go on the transports that were taking them all out, and they all hid out in the cellars and places, and then when the final liquidation of the ghetto came, they fought. And they fought for about 100 days, and it's a glorious episode in the history of Eastern European Jewry. But it's only the Zionist groups that fought. Only the Zionist groups fought. And so, you know, what about the others? Suppose they had all resisted. I don't think you could go to Scotland and do what Hitler did in some countries. You start taking children away from people in Scotland and, you know, and pulling, you know, them from their parents, you'd get like riotous, murderous behavior to the point that, you know, probably the result would be the same. Everyone would get killed, but still, it wouldn't have been like you watched in the Second World War in Europe. So this is not, I'm not trying to be cruel, but this is what Hess is talking about, how to liberate. And he's not just talking, see, there are a lot of, you know, assimilated Jews and others who, you know, these kinds of things frighten them, as we know. And he says that's one of the main problems. How to liberate the Jewish masses by means of reawakened patriotism from a spirit-deadening formalism. That's what he's talking about. So this Hess is, you may think he sounds like a fool or a jerk, but this is amazingly prescient in terms of someone writing this 140 years ago. Just think of that someone could write these things and they make sense even today. If we succeed in beginning, then no matter how difficult the practical realization of our plan might be, the difficulties will be overcome by experience itself. It's only the Jewish heart that is dead. That's what Herzl found too. If the Jews are no longer capable of patriotic inspiration, then we should have to despair of our hope, which, like every other great historical ideal, cannot be realized without tremendous struggle. He knows it's going to have to be struggle. And then he says further down there, the Jewish religion has indeed been, as Heine, that famous German lyrical poet, thought, with him all quote so-called enlightened Jews, Haskalah Jews, more of a misfortune than a religion for the last 2,000 years. Now that is not something the religious Orthodox Jews would like to hear. But our, quote, progressive Jews are deluding themselves if they think they can escape this misfortune through enlightenment or conversion, and that also is very prescient how he understands that. Who did Hitler take first? All the assimilated people in Germany. Every Jew is, and then he went after the population reservoirs in Eastern Europe. Every Jew is, whether he wishes or not, bound unbreakably to the nation. And only when Jewish people be freed from the burden which is borne so heroically for thousands of years will the burden of Judaism be removed from the shoulders of these progressive Jews. It is their duty, it is the duty of all of us to carry the yoke of the kingdom of heaven until the end. So he's trying to rally people like the Risorgimento in Italy. Last, social regeneration on 137. The civilized nations are at present preparing for a common exploitation of nature. So this is what we've seen happen up to our day to the point of global warming. This will be carried out by means of labor based on the discoveries of science. Well, that's exactly what's happened, and now we are finding that we have Silicon Valleys that can support people who just can sit and think. And social parasites no longer have any function or be allowed to exist. Well, as it turns out, the people who's calling social parasites to some extent maybe do have a function, in that, you know, Silicon Valley in Israel is maybe the substitute for rabbinic yeshivas. And so it's not necessarily clear that he's got that right, but still it's interesting that he understands these things. He's talking about what maybe we see in Europe in the 20th century, maybe not the 21st century. But he says labor is necessary. And what do they put on the concentration camps when they march them in? Arbeit macht frei, labor. That's what was the complaint of the fascist, anti-Semitic sort of mindset. Make them work. They don't work. Make them work. Laugh at them. Make them work. And Hess is saying that that's important too. That the nation would allow them to work, physical, redeeming labor, to revive something. But I know also, further down that page, that the Jews in exile, at least the majority of them, cannot devote themselves successfully to productive labor. In the first place because they lack the necessary condition and ancestral soil. Well, this guy, to my mind, has it all, and you know, he's thought it all through. And he's not famous. But he's full, this is the people that in that History of Zionism book he calls the forerunners. And the last part of that particular section, hence no Jew, page 138 at the top, where the Orthodox or not can refrain from cooperating with the rest in the task of elevating all Jewry. Every Jew, even the converted, should cling to the cause and labor for the regeneration of Israel. So someone said, what is redemption? What is messianism in their view? He's giving it to you here, the regeneration of Israel. So Zionism, unfortunately, got a bad name, because when people say Zionism, what's that? It's just the Jewish national liberation movement. But people think, ooh, Zionism, that's some plot or something, the elders of Zion. But in fact, if it didn't have that odd name, only most Jews or evangelical Christians, really, I don't think Catholic Christians or others like that kind of Christianity understand it, because they don't read the prophets that much. Evangelicals read the prophets, take the prophets' fundamentals, take them very seriously. So they know that return to Zion was the way the prophets spoke about the ingathering of the people. What is Zion? I told you once, but in case you forgot. What is Zion? It's not Mount Zion. Of course, the Mormons took it over for their Zionism. Their Zionism was in Utah. And therefore you have the Zion National Park in Utah, places like that. Zion became the promised land for them. But what is Zion traditionally or historically? Huh?
Slang.
What?
It's slang.
No. It's the seat of the Davidic family in Jerusalem. It's where the Davidic monarchy functioned. Mount Zion is a little hill, you know, in Jerusalem. It's not a hill, you know, Jerusalem itself is on top of a hill, but it's one of the little rises in the hill area that encompasses Jerusalem, and it was where the seat of government was of the Davidic monarchy. That's what it was. And unfortunately, that's what the prophets knew. So when they're prophesying Davidic restoration or whatever it is that Christianity has picked up for its prophecies and so on, they speak in terms of Zion, return to Zion. And, if you've ever read that psalm, the one where it's talks about returning to Zion with happiness on their faces and joy in their hearts and so on and so forth. I don't remember exactly which psalm it is, but I think you're looking, it's that one where they can't play their harps in a foreign land.
It's 136.
You know, may our tongues cleave to the roof of our mouth. How can we sing a hymn of Zion or something like that? Can you find out? Is it 136?
I'm not very well versed in this book. In fact,
well, let me see. I'll check if it is 136. I'm not sure if that's what it is, but our friend here seems to know the exact.
It's my favorite song.
Yeah, it's an absolutely stupendous song. You think it is 136? I hope you're right. Then we can do it quickly and not throw a lot of. But I want all the psalms are steeped in this thing. No, it's not 136 here. In this one, oh, it's 137. You're close. By the waters or rivers of Babylon, you know, every translation is a little bit different. We sat and wept at the memory of Zion, and hung our harps on the poplars there. For our jailers had asked us to sing a song, and our captors wished us to entertain them. Sing us one of the songs of Zion, they said. How could we sing a song of Yahweh or of the God on an alien soil? If I forget you, O Jerusalem, may my right hand not function properly. They say, forget its cunning, but it really means not function properly, or not have its strength. May my tongue remain, every translation is different, stick to the roof of my mouth. If I do not keep you in mind, if I do not count Jerusalem the greatest of my joys. Anyway, I don't know the rest of this, but there are other ones about coming to Zion with joy on their faces and so on and so forth. Just read the Psalms. They're just chock-a-block full. So the Jews understood, and I'm sure Christians who read the Psalms understand. And the prophets, Zion means returning to Jerusalem. But unfortunately, it was a kind of esoteric or abstruse expression that I think the rest of the world misunderstood and still does. So when Arabs or Persians or the Carlisle group of people like that who were hostile to anything, quote, Zionistic, the UN, for instance, even though they have quotes from Isaiah over their big podium, hear anything about Zionism, they want to, condemn it or something. They even had a thing some years back in the UN, Zionism is racism and stuff like that. So I said every other country can have a national movement, but the Jews can't. And they're such a small people who've been through so many things. I don't know what the big problem is, frankly. It's such a minuscule group of people. I mean, even Guatemalans can have a national movement. Nobody objects. It's just kind of stupid when you think about it. It's kind of stupendous, the situation that these people face and which we're still facing. I do think that Israel is atom bomb project number one. And I honestly think that they will, if they get their nukes, they will wipe it out. And, not many people will weep either, except the Jews. So the only recourse the Jews have, I mean, the UN isn't going to say it. The Bush administration talks, but they're never going to do anything because, now with the new election, they'll all tie each other up in the knots and no one will be able to do anything. They'll never get a resolution from Congress to do anything on anything. They'll just disagree. So ultimately, the Israelis are going to have to do it, take it into their own hands if it comes to that. And if it comes to that, they'll get condemned by everybody for doing it. But they are atom bomb project number one. I mean, we are in the target too, but we're not seriously threatened with extinction. We're threatened with some very serious tragedies. I mean, we can lose a few cities to nuclear and biological terrorism. And I would assume Washington, New York, and LA are the first three on the list. You know, but the country isn't threatened. The country will revive from that, and all, you know, it will be, all hell will break loose. That's all I can tell you. Such a thing occurs. This country will, I don't think, stand for that. This whole country will be mobilized in such a way that will be frightening. So I hope to God that never happens here, because all of you guys will be drafted. That's all I can tell you. You know, such a thing occurs. And that's why I think what we're watching in the world is something that people have to think really seriously about how to deal with it, because it's not something that is just going to go away.
What are your theories on why that global anxiety exists against the Jews developing the state?
I think we covered it in this class. I think it's a theological issue. I think it's been theological from the beginning.
I was wondering if there was anything besides that.
To my mind, it causes all the other things. I'm sure there are lots of other things that you can heap upon it, you know, but how you can get all worked up about a people who's already been decimated by half in the last 50, 100 years, I mean, and still, you know, want to decimate them further, I just don't understand. You know, it's just, I just don't understand. So that's why I teach these courses, because honestly, I don't understand. And everyone else seems to understand, oh, it's so troublesome and so on. We don't question, I'm not against the Arabs by any means. I love Arabs. I teach Islam, I live among them, I like their spirit and so on, etc. I mean, I think how many Arab countries are there from Morocco to Iraq? Something like 20 or so? What? They deserve 20 countries. 20 countries, and they can't tolerate one little Israel? This, to my mind, is the most amazing of inhospitality. And yet they think they're totally justified because everything that happens, the Israelis are responsible for, even though it's, you know, action causes a reaction and so on. Obviously, if someone's going to set off a suicide bomb, someone is going to retaliate, and it goes on and on and on and on. You know, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So, but to feel that you're right, that in fact you're justified in bombing and doing all these things when you've got so much land. I mean, you would think if the Quran, which is clearly based on Judaism, much more than Christianity. I mean, Muhammad is imbued with Judaism. It's just cosmopolitan Judaism in the Quran and Islam. You would think that people would recognize their debt, and instead of being poisoned with hatred, would actually say, come, we'll shelter you, come, we'll give you hospitality, you've suffered enough. But no, just murderous instinct for killing. So I don't know the answer to what you say. I don't know, it's theological. To me, it's theological. No human would feel these things if it wasn't based on some theology. I mean, we don't feel murderous hatred towards Eskimos. We don't feel murderous hatred towards Bushmen. I mean, some people do, or Aborigines in Australia or whatever. I mean, okay, people aren't happy about them, but no one wants to, you know, put them in gas chambers that I'm aware of in a systematic way. So it's, to me, theological. That's the only thing that can explain it to me. Okay, let's look at Pinsker. This is another great thinker and writer of this period. Now, Pinsker is 1821 to 1891. And, you know, all these, I mean, it's somewhat, you say, well, you're just doing the same thing over and over again. No, there's slight differences. You see it developing. I mean, we have the Reform Orthodox Conservative Judaism well covered in the Rudovsky book. This is worth covering because this is really what's happening in our day. I mean, Reform Conservative Orthodox Judaism may be there, but it's not what's happening. It's not the living spirit of the people at the moment, if you want to call it that. This is 1882. this is extremely interesting, and this is again 10 or 15 years before Herzl. What I want to show you is these are what Lacour in his book History of Zionism calls the forerunners. And again, for Hess, it's the 1848 uprisings in Europe, national uprisings in Hungary, Italy, and all these other places. Just as it was for Marx. But now we're 20 years later, or actually maybe 40 years later, when Pinsker actually writes all these things. And Pinsker is another one of these extremely assimilated, civilized Jews, living in a very advanced section of Russia, quite a economically flourishing section of Russia. The area of Russia around the Black Sea, which is still a pretty economically viable area, put it that way. This is in Odessa. And this is outside the Pale of Settlement. Now, I didn't get into too much what the Pale of Settlement was. But we mentioned it a bit in our early part of the course. The Pale of Settlement was where the mass of Jews were sort of flushed or pushed as time went on, as they moved from west to east towards Poland and the Russian border, and then the Russian Tsarist regimes forced them to remain there. They were not let into Russia proper. They were only allowed in these Pale of Settlement areas. And it was a huge area from basically the Baltic almost down into Romania and places like that. I don't even know what the extent of it was, but in Russia, it is the whole western part of what Russia, what we now call White Russia, Belarus. It was on the Polish border, since the Polish border in every war kept switching. Well, you know, it either ran through it, or one side or the other side of it, it went back and forth. But this is where Jews were allowed to exist, and I think the word Pale comes from work, where they were allowed to work. Because in Hebrew, the word work is Peoleh. Peoleh. In fact, in Israel, the Workers' Party are called the Peoleh Zion, the Workers of Zion. And I think the Pale in English came from Peoleh, or Peolim, or Pa'al, to work. I think so. This should be in the way here. And I think that's what it meant, the Pale of Settlement, where Jews could live and survive. But they couldn't leave it. Then in the tired, give me your tired of your poor era of American history, which is celebrated in the poem on the Statue of Liberty by the young Jewish woman in New York, from a Sephardi background, I think she was, Emma Lazarus. Her name, I remember her name finally, Emma Lazarus. Watching these huddled masses coming from Eastern Europe. From about the 1880s and so on to the 1910s, was the masses of Jewish immigration that started coming from this Pale. And this is where the mass of Jews in America come from. This period and this time. The Ellis Island and all that sort of thing. You know, the Lower East Side, if you know about New York, you know, where they had these stalls and, you know, Mulberry Street and places like that. You can still go down there and find Jewish merchants and stuff. So the big immigration, there was the German immigration in the 1840s in the wake of, and 50s in the wake of the suppression of, and 60s in the wake of the suppression of the national movements and the conservative reaction in Central Europe. But then in the 1880s, it's coming from Russia, 90s and 1900s, early 1900s. And it's coming from the Pale. Now, the Pale was ultimately liquidated by Hitler. It either came to America or it was liquidated. Some managed to make its way to Palestine in these movements that we're talking about. So in case you're interested in movements of peoples, that's what happened. But you see, here is Pinsker's biography. I think ultimately he became a doctor. He even went to the University of Moscow. He studied law in Odessa, and he got even a medical degree. He's a highly civilized person. In the Crimean War in the 1860s, he was honored by the Tsar for his help in controlling outbreaks of typhus and so on. But things were getting bad in Russia in what we call pogroms. Pogroms is a famous word that most people, I guess, out here don't know about. Pogroms are government-instituted riots in the ghettos, where people are either killed, maimed, or totally their houses burned or what happened, and so on. And these were going on constantly in these areas, mostly by Cossack troops, but others. And why? I don't know why. Yeah, ask me why. Usually it's because of the socialist movements were blamed on Jews or whatever, and so the Tsarists would set their police into these areas. The Cossacks were their mounted sort of cavalry that used to love going through these areas and chop people up. And then, of course, here it is. When the Tsar Alexander II, who was a reforming Tsar, was assassinated, you don't know the history of Russia probably, in March 1881, because of his liberal, and he was actually liberal, but he wasn't liberal enough for the anarchists and all the other groups that were in Russia at this time, trying to overthrow the regime. And those that didn't succeed went off to Siberia and so on, where they got together and made other contacts and waited for the next period. Came in the First World War period. But the Russian defeat in the Russo-Japanese War in 1905, that was a huge wellspring for the revolutionary liberals who saw the country tottering, but not tottering enough that they could do anything about it at that point. But there was the Russians had to reinstitute their parliament after the Russo-Japanese disaster. The Russians were roundly defeated by the Japanese Navy off the coast of the Sichuan coast, where all these restaurants we now use. I think it's Tsingtao beer or whatever is one of those places because of some of the immigrants who were out there. It's a German beer. In any case, the Russians were defeated by the Japanese Navy, which no one could imagine. The Japanese, who'd just gotten even the modernization period of the 1860s, could get a fleet together and beat the Russians. And that's what I told you. Theodore Roosevelt went out there and got the Nobel Prize for making peace among them at that time. Anyway, it may interest you to look into some of those things if you like history. But in any case, that was after this. There was a huge reaction to the assassination. And I think there were pogroms even in Odessa, where Pinsker felt fairly secure, and this turned him into a Zionist. And he became a leader of a movement. See it on page 181. That's very important for our purposes. It was called. This is not just pie in the sky stuff like that. This is called Hibat Zionism. I think this is where the Zionism gets its name. The Hibat Zionism, the Hibat Zionist movement. Now, those of you who are studying Hebrew, Hibat means love of. So it's love of Zion. The name of a movement. And those people who practice this love are, I think it's Odive Zion, the lovers of Zion. And that is an actual pioneer settlement movement of people not going as Sadaqah Jews, but people going to work the land. Well, moved over someplace, I think, but I don't know where. I think it's not, it's just cold.
Aircon.
Oh, aircon. Oh, well, it always is on when it's cold and off when it's warm. That's typical of Cal State Long Beach. They waste their money on when they don't need it, and when they do need it, they don't spend it. Anyway, that's typical of the whole world, so I'm not going to blame them particularly. So in any case, he wrote this book, Auto-Emancipation. That's a really interesting title, or essay, because you see it picks up the idea of emancipation, but now it's auto-emancipation. You see now, most people in this class are not Jewish. So many of these things fall on you like, you know, like, oh my God, what's he talking about? You know, but for any Jewish person who would study these things, they would be amazed at the, you know, progression of events. They themselves don't know anything about this. I can tell you, if you talk to any Jewish person out there, you'll meet on the campus or any place, they don't know what you're talking about. They've never heard of Pinsker. They don't know who Hess is. They wouldn't know Hibat Zions from a watermelon. You know, I mean, that's the depth of the education. I don't think there's a Jewish plot out there. There's nothing. There's zero out there in terms of education and consciousness and familiarity with these things. Some of you may be Jewish, I've never asked, and I don't want to know, it's not my business, but you in this room know more than you'll meet in 90% of Jews from studying these texts. That's all that I can say. 95% I would say. Maybe 98. That's how pathetic the things that we're talking about are, how deep my own family. I can ask my own family, and here I am teaching these things. I shouldn't say this on camera. They'll hear me. They wouldn't know any of these people. They wouldn't know just one of my sons might. You know, they wouldn't know any of these people or any of these movements or any of these. And you say, well, you're really negligent. There's nothing you can do against modern culture. You can't do it unless you beat them down like Hasidism does. Yeah.
Are you talking about Jews primarily in America, or are you talking about...
Yeah, Jews you'll meet here on the college campus or in Southern California. I'm not talking... Oh, in Israel they may know a little more. They will, because this is part of the thing that they'll study in their schools. Because in California, Chicago, even New York. Pinsker, who's he? What's auto-emancipation? Never heard of it. Haven't got a clue what it is. That's what I'm going to class who they'll meet. That they know more than the average Jew that they will meet on these subjects. And yet this is a Jewish, supposedly, movement. Okay. An appeal to his people by a Russian Jew. He quotes Hillel, a famous thing that the rabbis are always quoting, if I am not for myself, who will be for me? And if not now, when? And so now, the Jews have learned to endure the cry again of hep hep, as their father did in days gone by. I told you what hep hep means. No, I shouldn't tell you, but since Borat is telling everyone everything now, I might as well do something to counter it. Borat is the worst thing for anti-Semitism that God ever even imagined. As we discussed last time, I mean, sophisticated people know they'll have a good laugh because he's funny in many ways, but the average sort of dodo who goes to see the war just will imbibe some of these things they've never heard before. So it's pretty gruesome, but he doesn't care. He's just rolling in money like Mel Gibson did. So the two of them should go and get in the hot tub together. That'd be kind of twosome, huh? Mel Gibson and Borat. There we go. There we go. But hep hep, you see, what did hep hep mean? Hi Jerusalem e perduto, Latin. Jerusalem is lost. So there you ask, where is it coming from? People used to follow Jews in Eastern Europe. When they see a Jew with curls or black costume or beard or whatever it is that they could feel they could identify them with, they would go behind them and say, hep, 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 hep. And that would be a way of sticking the knife in verbally. you've lost, man, you're lost, you're finished, you might as well pack it in. That was what that was saying, and people were apparently saying it again in his time. These liberated, assimilated, enlightened Jews thought that was all past. And so if you do not take it, close your eyes, hide ostrich-like as if you will. But if you don't take advantage of these fleeting moments of repose that exist and devise remedies for the future with which the incompetent have for centuries vainly tried to relieve our unhappy nation, lasting peace will be impossible for you. So he knows something terrible is in the offing. He feels it. And by the time Herzl comes, Herzl is obsessed. He knows a terrible, catastrophic earthquake is coming. And it came. And nobody really succeeded in doing very much about it, obviously. And Hitler spoke about the Jewish question. That's what the final solution was to the Jewish, he called it the Jewish problem, as von Dreitzke was talking about. But it is the eternal problem, you see, represented by the Jewish question. You know, that's what the final solution claims to solve. Okay, we'll solve this Jewish question problem once and for all. You know how we'll solve it? We'll just eradicate them. Stirs men today as it did, so he's aware that the question is in the air because of the immigration, because of the movement of populations, something of what we're experiencing now, not against Jews. I don't think that anti-Semitism is really the key issue of the day, you know, because the Jews have already been basically reduced to hardly threatening state of being, except in the Middle East, the mind of the Middle East. You know, all the immigration patterns that are besieging Europe and so on, and here in America, they've got all these bugaboos about people from south of the border, as if that's a real serious threat of some kind and so on. So, you know, there are these issues still, you know, because of modern transportation and communications. That's really what brings it about. But in Europe, it hadn't gotten that far, and it was only the Jews that were the issue at that time. Gypsies maybe slightly as well. They were treated similarly in many cases. Anyway, so the problem is, he said, that the Jews do not exist as a nation. The bottom of that, page 182. In the latter case, the basis is lacking for that mutual regard which is generally regulated and secured by international law or by treaties. That's the problem. Only when this base is established, and that's what we're seeing today, that they have established it somewhat, but there's huge questions involved still. When the equality of the Jews with the other nation becomes a fact, can the problem presented by the Jewish question be solved? So his solution is give them national status. And then you would have to treat with the Jews as a nation the way nations treat with each other. And I think, you know, when you think of the trouble the Jews are causing in the world today in people's minds, not in my mind, but in people's minds, suppose half of them had not been liquidated. That would have really been a powerful group to have to deal with. And, you know, I think if things had gotten moving faster and on their own, and we didn't have the dead end that he's speaking about of rabbinism and assimilation of people opposing this and so on, I think the Jews could have really got moving much quicker and could have actually succeeded to some extent in avoiding the Holocaust. Because these people were envisioning its coming. That's what I'm reading. They see it coming. Unfortunately, although such equity indeed existed in long forgotten past when the Jews were a national people, we can hope to see it restored only in the remote future. Herzl, though, says when he's, we'll see in his diaries, when he's addressing a crowd, that he thinks within 50 years he will have succeeded. And if you count the day in 1897 that he wrote that, 50 years from 1897 was 1947, exactly when the Jewish state was revived by the United Nations. So he was pretty, also pretty prescient in thinking it could be solved. Pinsker doesn't think it can be solved in any time soon. You see, it has no fatherland, many motherlands. It's everywhere a guest, nowhere at home, top of what it is. The nation never have to deal with the Jewish nation, only Jews. Yeah, I think that's really incredible. See, he's going to say, we can't wait for the people to emancipate us. We're not Mendelssohn. We have to, and I think this is a good lesson for the Afro-Americans too. We can't wait for emancipation. We have to emancipate ourselves. You know, we can't accept it from other people. We have to do it ourselves. That's the only way it's ever going to take root. Anyway, I don't want to draw too many parallels. It was good because, as I said, the Afro-Americans, I think, have been very successful in this country, 30, 40 million strong. So I don't think that they in any way are not successful in many regards. It was impossible for this national character to develop in the diaspora. What's the diaspora? The dispersion. Diaspora is I think it's a Greek word for dispersion. The strongest factor at the bottom of that page, 183, operating to prevent the Jews from striving after an independent national existence is the fact they don't feel the need for such an existence. Oh, that's so true. If you'd been around in the 1940s, I mean, I was young then, but I could still feel this. You never felt anyone feeling that they needed an independent national existence. It was like rare. Even though this horrible things were going on. You know, I never met anyone. I went to school with people when I was a young boy and so on. I never met anyone who felt this need. And it's the fact that they do not feel the need for such an existence. And they deny the reasonableness of it. That's the problem, he says. In a sick man, the absence of desire for food and drink is a serious symptom. He's a medical person, he uses medical imagery. It's not always possible to cure him of this loss of appetite, and even if his appetite could be restored, it's still a question whether he'll be able to digest the food even if he desires it. So he uses his medical terminology. And so then he says, at the bottom of 183, top of 184, we must prove that the misfortunes of the Jews are due above all to their lack of desire for national existence. So he terms it differently. He says that you have basically dead man walking. You know, the symptom that you have here, I think he's right there. You see, you wouldn't have anti-Semitism so easily if people just didn't have to deal with individual Jews. Oh, he's a moneylender. Oh, he's a slum landlord. Oh, he cheated me in his shop, etc., 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 etc. So then you can always whip up, you know, that doesn't mean that Scots people don't cheat people, or other people, Asian people don't cheat people, and so on and so forth. But you gotta say, oh, the Jewish guy, you know, he did this, that, and the other thing to me. So you can, you know, you can label people, pigeonhole them, you know, in this manner. And I think he's right. That's a very intelligent statement. The fact that you can, that, you know, you don't have to deal with them as a nation, with all the goods and bads of the nations. So this, above all, is due to the lack of desire for national independence, and this desire must be aroused and maintained if they do not wish forever to be in this disgraced state, in this low, horrific state where then the Germans say, oh, we don't want these disgusting Jews to come into Germany, they're too low and vile, and so on and so forth. Or we can get the Mel Gibson sort of approach, you know, ooh, look at them, you know, and so on and so forth. And we can say, oh yeah, that's how I feel, you know, disgusted, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Oh, don't let them in the country club or whatever, or cartoons about there being vermin, you see. They can't, you can't then point to them as this kind of people. They must prove that they must become a nation, and so on. He's really quite amazing here. The mere fact of belonging to two people is a mark of Cain on one's forehead, he's saying now in 1880s. Okay, part 2 here of his essay. After the Jewish people yielded up its existence as a political entity, It didn't submit to total destruction. It didn't cease to exist as a spiritual nation. Thus the world saw, this is an incredible, another lovely image from medicine, in this people the frightening form of the dead walking among the living. Yeah, dead man walking. This apparition, this ghost-like apparition of a people without unity, organization, land, etc., yet moving among the living. This eerie form, scarcely paralleled in history. I read it to you because I can't put it in his words. That's better we all hear it. Unlike anything that preceded or followed it, could not fail to make strange and peculiar impression upon people's imagination. Last year asking, this is another thing he says. Not just that, but that, of course, helped keep them in this horrific state. And he says, the fear of ghosts is inborn. I don't know if we still have that problem. Anyway, the fear of the Jewish ghost has been handed down and strengthened for generations. He calls it Judeophobia. And of course, Borat's a great example of Judeophobia. It's a form of demonopathy, demon pathology. And I teach historical Jesus, as you know, and I have to tell you, I think the New Testament is infected with it. I'm sorry to tell you that, but I have a right to say it after all what's happened. And if good Christians of goodwill are not prepared to recognize that, that's their problem. You know, as I've said, Jesus, who supposedly was Jewish, would expect really good Christians to do something about such things. And I don't see that happening, etc. But in any case, it's there, and you'd have to be blind to miss it. A child wouldn't see it because that's how the child gets infected. But an adult reading these materials will see it. And there is this what he calls demonization, demon pathology, running through the texts, unfortunately. It comes from Greco-Roman sources. I don't think it's Palestinian. Anyway, it's the fear of ghosts, the mother of Judeophobia. He doesn't connect it to that, but I do. Which has evoked that abstract, and that's my answer. What I might call platonic hatred, because of which the whole Jewish nation is held responsible, yeah, well, there it is, for the real or supposed misdeeds of individual members. He just talks generally. He doesn't talk about the other one. And then he does, I guess, bring that up. They are said to have crucified Jesus, to have drunk the blood of Christians, etc., etc., etc. Thus have Judaism, bottom of the page, and anti-Semitism passed for centuries through history as inseparable companions. Yeah, he says here. You'd have to be blind not to see it, that the Jews are not the chosen people. Yeah, they're the people chosen for universal hatred. Yeah, since they lost their nation. And we're still singing. And it's just not among people in America of goodwill here in this class or in this university. We're seeing it in the international organizations, in the UN. I mean, it just exudes anti-Semitism. It's kind of frightening. We see it from all this Persian guy, just like spouts class lines. We see it on all the Islamic TV channels. Christians don't do this anymore because it's too embarrassing for them since what happened. But it's still they're not willing to combat it. They're not willing to do anything about it. And it's got to a crescendo now because the Jews are a little bit successful. A little bit successful, not a lot. Anyway, I don't know where it's going to end, and it's kind of frightening, but he says, having analyzed Judeophobia, on 186, as an hereditary form of demonopathy peculiar to the human race, well, I think he goes too far there, but he has his hand on something. So, down at the bottom here. The foreigner, who has no need to be or seem to be a patriot, but as for Jews, he's not a native of his own home country, but he's also not a foreigner. He is in very truth a stranger par excellence. Now, we're going to have to see, this is being written in southern Russia, Odessa, on the Crimea, in the 1880s. And, it's something that we can still appreciate 120 years later. The Jew can make no such return, consequently can make no claim to hospitality. The foreigner claims hospitality which he can repay. but the Jew can't repay it. He's not a guest, much less a welcome guest. He's like a beggar. Who makes beggars welcome? So you see, people saw this in Europe. The Reform approach is just papering it over for these people. They knew that Reform Judaism was a joke, a paper over kind of joke, in Europe anyway. Not, succeeded in America quite well, but in Europe it was, stillborn. And he gives the reasons why. The Jews are aliens who can have no representatives because they have no fatherland, because they have none, because their home has no boundaries beyond which they can entrench themselves. Their misery knows no bounds. The general law doesn't apply to Jews as strangers. Medicine tried to make it happen, but it didn't. On the other hand, there are everywhere laws for the Jews. Like Negroes, like women, but unlike free peoples, they must be emancipated. So in the 1880s, women hadn't been emancipated either, though in America there was an emancipation, but the Americans went back on it in 1875 when the Reform Republican Party collapsed and the racist thugs took over in the South and instituted the Jim Crow laws. And from then on, it took another 100 years for America to realize the promise of the Civil War. In any case, so he goes on. Middle and bottom of that page. The legal emancipation of the Jews is the crowning achievement of our century in Europe. In America, it was the Afro-American situation. But legal emancipation is not social emancipation. And that has also been the Afro-American issue. And with the proclamation of the former, the Jews are still far from being emancipated. The emancipation of the Jews naturally finds itself its justification in the fact that it will always be considered to have been a postulate of logic, Mendelssohn, natural religion, natural law, or, if you like, enlightened self-interest. It was never a spontaneous expression of human feeling, warmth. Yeah, that's what I'm complaining about. Where is the compassion? Where is the human warmth? That's what, and I still ask that today. Never was there. We just, oh, well, Jews, all people are equal, the Jews are a part of people, therefore they should be equal too. But where is the love, compassion, the spontaneous feeling? Far from owing its origin of the spontaneous feeling of the peoples, and we saw what happened when the Germans moved across Eastern Europe, in Czechoslovakia, Poland. These people rushed to throw them into fires and everything quicker than the Germans could round them up. And so it's never a matter of course, and has never taken such deep root that discussion of it becomes unnecessary. Pretty good for explaining the situation. To sum up, next page, 188. In the western provinces of Russia, we behold the Jews herded together. That's the Pale of Settlement I'm talking to you about, at the bottom of the page, 188. Leading a wretched existence. You see, he's outside the Pale. He lives a fairly good existence. Nevertheless, there are unceasingly complaints of the exploitation they practice, which is a joke, he says. To sum up what has been said, for the living, the Jew is a dead man, for the natives, an alien and a vagrant, for property holders, a beggar, for the poor, an exploiter, and a millionaire, for patriots, a man without a country, for all classes, a hated rival. Well, to my mind, he's got the European situation. I don't hate to bring this to America because I really don't think it applies to America. But we're doing this and see how this thought went. Okay, now, let's see if we can pick up some more things here. This is part 4. I don't know. Let's see. Pick up a few more things in here. It's hard to just pick them out of the blue because these guys are so eloquent. Thus the Jews, in the bottom of that page, instead of really facing their own situation, adopting a rational line of conduct, appeal to eternal justice, like Mendelssohn did, and fondly imagine the appeal will have some effect. Laugh at that. Further down in that paragraph at the end, to the Jews, however, in whom we are chiefly interested, that's what this essay is about, he will say, you are foolish because you stand awkwardly by and expect of human nature something which it has always lacked, humanity. You're contemptible because you have no real self-love and no national self-respect. Yeah, I think that's what a lot of Europeans probably felt in their souls. Not they couldn't express it rationally. But I find if you go up to European peoples who are all proud of their nationhood and so on, and exude a certain pride and so on, they respond very positively to that. And Muslims do too. They don't like people who cringe. And, you know, I hate to say it's the same as a dog, for instance. If the dog senses that you're afraid of him or you cringe, then the dog feels more like attacking you for some unknown reason. I don't know why. I'm not trying to hurt the dog in nature by saying that. National self-respect, how can we obtain it? Not through Israel Jacobson, nor through the Hasids as far as he's concerned. It's true our loving protectors further down have always taken good care that we should never catch our breath and recover our self-respect. The church in Rome always wanted the Jews to be despised as an example of what happens to people who supposedly killed Christ. Keep them alive, but keep them down. We will wage the most glorious of all partisan struggles with all peoples of earth who with one accord desire to exterminate us. But the war we have waged, and God knows how long we shall have to continue to wage it, has not been for our fatherland, but just for the wretched existence of millions of Jew peddlers. This is very interesting for the 1880s. I think it gives you a good picture of the time, and certainly in Russia. So he said, you know, the hatred's there always, and we just survived just to be a peddler. Is that what we put all this energy into surviving for? Next page. This is a real call to arms. He's, you know, okay, has analyzed it, but Pinsker is the first call to arms. Do something about it. Don't just sit here like a bunch of slugs. We didn't see that on account of the tactics unworthy of us, which we were forced to adopt, we sank lower in the eyes of our opponents, like von Treitschke and all those people. All we wanted, we prayed for a little place to lay our weary heads on. And so by constantly lessening our claims, the same can be said for Israel today. The fact that they keep lessening their claims, lessening their claims, lessening their claims. No one respects that. The Arabs, the Islamic world doesn't lessen its claims, it just keeps on increasing its claims. I don't say you should do either, but I'm just trying to say that he's talking about respect and dignity. We diminished in our own and in others' eyes until it became unrecognizable. We had no dignity left. The cruel game was equally amusing, whether we were caught or thrown, and was enjoyable all the more. Anyway, that's quite interesting how he puts it. May we note that passing our enemies in order to prove our inferiority have not failed to make capital of this last trait. One would think that men of genius, that is, that Jews produce some Einstein-type people, were as plentiful among our opponents as blackberries in August. He's not very happy. The wretches, they reproach the eagle who once soared to heaven and recognize the divinity because he cannot rise high in the air after his wings have been clipped. So he's very angry. Obviously, there were some very bad pogroms in Odessa. Next section, 5. The national consciousness, which until then had existed only in the latent state of sterile martyrdom, burst forth before our eyes among the masses of Russian and Romanian Jews in the form of an irresistible movement towards Palestine. This is the Hibat Zion movement he's talking about, that he is witnessing in his own time. And for the end of that section, if an individual is unfortunate enough to see himself despised and rejected by society, no one wonders if he commits suicide, but where is the deadly weapon to give the coup de grace to all the Jews scattered over the face of the earth? Such destruction is neither possible nor desirable. So he thought at that time. That's not what turned out to be the case. Anyway, he wants self-help. We must establish ourselves as a living nation, he says at the end of that. 6. Let's see. The idea, like Hess was heaping abuse on, and we've seen it in the reform and different other movements that we witness in Germany, the delusive idea that we are fulfilling by our dispersion of providential mission, a mission which no one believes, an honorable station which we, to speak frankly, would gladly resign if only the epithet Jew would be blotted out of the memory of man. We must seek our honor and our salvation not in self-deception. He sees Reform Judaism and all of its variations as self-deception, delusion. He's not even talking about Orthodox Judaism. So, let's see, I think we've heard most of this now. At the bottom of page 193. The most important of these results is the constantly growing conviction that we are nowhere at home, and we finally must have a home, if not a country, of our own. Now that's interesting, because when the British come to proclaim the Balfour Declaration, and I'll stop in a moment and have a break. When the British come to proclaim the Balfour Declaration, they say His Majesty's government looks with favor upon the establishment of a national home in Palestine. That will be 1917, and I'll explain it to you, in the midst of World War I. When the British were launching their campaign from Egypt into Palestine and on into Syria, with Lawrence of Arabia, Allenby, you probably all saw the movie Lawrence of Arabia or heard of it. And they issued this declaration in anticipation of what they were going to do, like what America was going to do with Iraq. But they didn't say a nation or a state, they said a homeland, a national home. Not sovereignty. But you see, we'll see Chaim Weizmann was the leader of most of the Jews at that time in England. He became very famous. We'll talk about him as the first president of Israel 20 years later and so on and so forth, but not before the Holocaust had occurred. But I submit to you, from what we read of Herzl, Herzl would have thrown the Balfour Declaration back in the face of the British. He wouldn't have accepted it. Because what we'll see in Herzl's work is the Jews must have clear title. And the Balfour Declaration had a second clause which was put in there because of the objections of Jews to the Balfour Declaration in England, as I told you. It being clearly understood that nothing be done to upset the national existence or blah, blah, blah of the peoples in the land or, or here in England or something. I don't know the actual caveat there. But it took back with the second hand what it had given with the first and created all the problems we now see in Palestine, Israel, to the very day. But Herzl would have not accepted this Balfour Declaration, would have rejected it. He would have asked for something more clear. And so he's already anticipating this a little bit here when he said, he's not clear, should it be a country or just a home? Okay. We'll pick up there and finish this in the first 10 minutes next time, then we'll do Ben Yehuda. We're doing okay. Next time we will do Herzl. And we will be able then to do Jabotinsky after that and Weizmann. And I think that will be most of what we'll do in this course. But let's have a little break for 10 minutes. I don't need it, but you guys should have it. I could go on for